The heart monitor shrieked as the retired lieutenant colonel hurled his water jug across room 412, bellowing for a different nurse. Any nurse but this one. Someone who understood what real sacrifice looked like. Rachel Moreau didn't flinch. She set down her tray, walked to the window, drew the blinds, and slowly rolled her left sleeve up past her elbow. And the faded ink on her forearm drained every ounce of color from the old soldier's face. Snow had been falling on Ottawa since 4 a.m, the fine, dry kind that hissed against the windows of the Birchmount Veterans Health Center and turned the parking lot into a gray blur. Rachel Moreau arrived for her shift the way she always did, 20 minutes early, a double-double from the Tim Hortons on Carling going cold in her hand, her boots leaving wet prints down the 4th floor corridor. She was 36 years old, a senior nurse on the vascular access team, and in 9 years at Birchmount, she had earned a reputation the younger staff spoke about in the break room like a rumor. Moreau didn't rattle. Moreau didn't raise her voice. Moreau had once talked a 240-pound man out of a full psychotic episode using nothing but a cup of tea and a voice like still water. Nobody knew much else about her. She kept her sleeves down, her hair in a plain low knot, and her history to herself. On this particular Thursday in late January, the 4th floor was holding its breath. The trouble was in room 412. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Wallace Drummond, 63 years old, admitted 5 days earlier with a raging infection burrowed deep in his left hip, seated there by shrapnel fragments the surgeons at Landstuhl had judged too dangerous to remove 17 years ago. Osteomyelitis, the chart said. Bone infection. The kind that smolders for years and then one day decides to burn the house down. His white count was climbing. His fever was climbing, and his temper had already cleared out half the nursing roster. He called me I'm not even going to repeat it. Sophie Lanthier stood at the nursing station with her arms wrapped around herself, 24 years old and 8 months out of Algonquin College, mascara smudged at the corner of one eye. He ripped his IV right out, Rachel. Blood everywhere. He said, if one more child in a costume tried to touch him, he'd discharge himself and die at home like a soldier instead of in here with civilians. Dr. Amrit Grewal was reading the chart like a man reading his own obituary. He was a good internist, patient as bedrock, but he'd been awake since 2 a.m., and it showed. His veins are finished, he said quietly. Blown, scarred, done. We've missed 2 doses of Pip-Tazo since midnight because we can't keep a line in him, and he won't let anyone try. If this keeps up, the infection seeds his bloodstream, and then we're not talking about a hip anymore. We're talking about sepsis. He needs a PC line, Rachel. Today. This morning. Then get an anesthetist to sedate him, Sophie said. He's refused sedation. He's refused everything. He's competent and he's furious, and he keeps demanding. Grewal exhaled through his nose. He keeps demanding someone else. Someone who, and I quote, has earned the right to put a needle in him. Rachel had been listening without a word, the way she listened to everything, like a person standing at the edge of a lake deciding whether the ice would hold. She reached across the counter and slid the chart out of Grewal's hands. Her eyes moved down the demographics page, past the medication list, past the allergy ban notations, and stopped on a single line under military history, transcribed off his Veterans Affairs file. Officer Commanding, Charles Company, 1st Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, Task Force 306, Panjwai District, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. Operation Medusa, September 2006. The chart didn't tremble in her hands. Her face didn't change, but something behind her eyes shut like a door, and Sophie, who was watching, would say later that it was the first time in 8 months she had ever seen Rachel Moreau hesitate. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Rachel closed the binder with a clean metallic snap. "Prep me a PCC kit and an ultrasound cart," she said, "and pull his 800 antibiotics from the Pyxis, so they're ready the second I have access." "I'll take him, Rachel." Gruel lowered his voice. "He put a food tray into the wall an hour ago. Security's been up twice. He's not going to hurt me." "You don't know that." "No," Rachel said, and there was something in the flatness of it that ended the conversation. "But I know him." She hadn't meant to say that last part out loud. She turned before anyone could ask what it meant. The corridor to room 412 was long and lined with photographs. The way every hallway at Birchmount was. Juno Beach, the Kapyong Hills, a Chinook lifting off a dust-brown field that Rachel never looked at directly. The same way you don't look directly at the sun. She rolled the ultrasound cart past all of it, her runners squeaking on the wax, and stopped outside the door. Through the narrow pane of glass she could see him. Wallace Drummond sat bolt upright against his pillows, as though slouching were a court-martial offense. Even sick, even sweating through his gown, with a fever of 39.5. He had the build of a man who had done push-ups on gravel for 40 years. Heavy through the shoulders, gray hair cut close and neat, a jaw like the prow of an icebreaker. His left forearm was wrapped in gauze, where he'd torn the IV out. On the floor, a dark stain of spilled apple juice was drying next to an overturned tray. The television was on, the sound muted, some CBC panel mouthing silently at nobody, and he was staring straight through it at something 10,000 kilometers and 17 years away. Rachel watched him for one breath. 2. Then she pushed the door open without knocking. "I told the last one," Drummond said, not turning his head. His voice was low gravel, parade square gravel. The kind of voice that had once carried across a company of 150 soldiers without a radio, and the one before that. "Unless you can show me you've done anything harder in your life than a 12-hour shift in a spin class, turn yourself around and send me someone else." "Good morning, Colonel Drummond." Rachel wheeled the cart to the bedside and locked the wheels. Her tone was even, unhurried, the voice of a woman commenting on the weather. "My name is Rachel. I'm from the Vascular Access Team, and I'll be looking after you today. Also, for the record, the juice belongs in the cup, not on my floor." That turned his head. His eyes were pale, an unsettling wolf gray, and they went over her the way she imagined he'd once inspected recruits. The plain scrubs, the bare forearms scrubbed to the elbow, no rings, no lashes, no nonsense. Whatever he saw, it didn't impress him. "Rachel," he repeated, like the name tasted of hospital food. "Let me save us both some time, Rachel. Your colleagues have poked 11 holes in me since Sunday. I've had children, and I mean children, dig around in my arms like they're looking for loose change in a couch. I've asked, politely, and then less politely, for someone competent. What I get instead is a parade of soft, coddled civilians who cry in the hallway when I raise my voice. So no, you will not be looking after me today. You'll go find your supervisor, and your supervisor will find me a military physician. And if this hospital can't produce one single person who understands discipline, I will sign whatever form lets me walk out that door." "You won't make it to the elevator," Rachel said. "Excuse me? Your last dose of antibiotics was almost 9 hours ago, Colonel. Your temperature is 39.6 and climbing. Your heart rate has been sitting above 110 all morning. The infection in your hip is winning, and every hour we don't get medicine into your bloodstream, it wins a little more. There is no version of today where you walk out of here." She pulled on a pair of gloves, one snap, then the other. "Your peripheral veins are destroyed, so I'm going to place what's called a PECCE line, a long, thin catheter that goes in above your elbow and threads up to sit near your heart. It takes me about 40 minutes. It will hold for the entire 6 weeks of treatment, and nobody will ever have to dig around in your arms again. I've placed over 1,000 of them. Now, I need your right arm." For a moment, one flickering moment, she saw it land, saw the soldier in him register the precision, the calm chain of facts delivered like a briefing, and then the fever and the fury rolled back over it like weather. "Do you have any idea," Drummond said softly, dangerously, "who you are talking to?" "I'm talking to the patient in room 412. "Ah, get out!" He leaned forward, and the effort of it made sweat bead along his hairline, made his hand shake where it gripped the rail, and the shaking only made him angrier. "Get someone else. Get me a man. Get me a medic, a real one. You people." His voice climbed, cracked, climbed again. "You people have no idea. You hang your little poppies in the lobby every November, and you think that means you understand. You understand nothing. You've never carried anything heavier than a clipboard. So get out of my room and send me someone who has earned the right to touch me." The monitor above his bed traced his rage in sharp green peaks. Rachel stood absolutely still, the ultrasound probe in her hand. She looked at him, really looked. At the tremor he was trying to hide, the leg he kept perfectly rigid because the slightest movement sent fire up the bone, the eyes that weren't actually focused on her at all, but on a doorway behind her that didn't exist. She had seen this before. Not this room, not this man, but this exact thing. A commander who had held 150 lives in his 2 hands, reduced to a bed and a gown and an enemy too small to shoot. The anger wasn't about the needle. The anger was the last piece of the uniform he had left. She set the probe down. "All right, Colonel," she said quietly. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go start your antibiotics running through an intraosseous line if I have to, or Dr. Gruwall is going to be in here in 5 minutes to have the capacity conversation with you, and neither of us wants that. So instead, I'm going to give you 1 hour. In that hour, I'm going to set up my kit, and you're going to sit with the fact that you have 2 grandchildren in Canada. It's in your file, Colonel. Your daughter lists them as emergency contacts, and you're going to decide whether your pride is worth more than watching them grow up. When I come back through that door, you will give me your arm." She unlocked the cart's wheels. "And Colonel," she added at the door without turning around, "you're wrong about one thing, but we'll get to that." The door clicked shut behind her, and Rachel Moreau stood in the corridor with her back against the cool wall and her eyes closed, and for 3 full seconds, she was not in Ottawa. She was in heat like a hand pressed over her mouth. She was in fine moondust sand that got into everything, into rifles and rations and the creases of your knuckles. And there was a sound in her ears like the whole sky tearing. Then a med cart rattled past, and a page crackled overhead about a lift assist on the 3rd floor, and she opened her eyes, and she was 36 years old in a snowstorm in January. And the real fight hadn't even started yet. By 1 o'clock, Wallace Drummond was losing. Rachel saw it from the doorway, before she saw a single number on the monitor. The room had that smell. Anyone who'd worked infection knew it. Sweetish and wrong, and the air was too warm, and Drummond had slid from his rigid upright posture into a restless half-recline, plucking at the blanket, his gown dark at the chest with sweat. 39.9. Heart rate 124. blood pressure starting its slow, ominous sag. The delirium was coming in like the tide, and with it, every wall the man had spent 17 years building was washing away grain by grain. "I gave you an order," he rasped as she came in with the kit. His eyes were glassy now, tracking her a half-second late. "I told you to send someone else. Did you not hear the order?" "The order was noted and ignored, Colonel." Rachel snapped the brakes on the procedure cart and began laying out her sterile field with quick, economical movements. Drape, gown, mask, the coiled blue length of the catheter. "Your fever's almost 40. Your kidneys are starting to complain. This line goes in now. Nobody." He tried to push himself up, and his hip betrayed him. The sound he made was half a growl and half a whimper, and he hated her for hearing it. She could see the hate flare. "Nobody is threading anything to my heart. You think a stethoscope makes you brave. You think because you work in a hospital, you understand life and death. You hand out pills, and you go home to your condo, and you sleep. You've never." His breath was coming faster now, feverish, the words tumbling over one another. "You want to talk about pain? You think a needle is pain? Colonel, lie back. Don't tell me what to do, girl." His fist came down on the mattress rail with a crack that echoed. "You call me sir or you call me colonel, and you have earned neither. You know what pain is? Pain is a boy from Cape Breton, 19 years old, asking you if he's going to be okay when you can see. When you can see, there's nothing below his." He stopped. His chest heaved. The monitor screamed his heart rate, and he wasn't in the room anymore. She watched it happen, watched the hospital walls dissolve for him, and something else pour in. "It's the 2nd of September, he whispered. "The wheat's higher than the levees. You can't see 10 feet. Marsh grass and grape rows and that river stinking in the heat. And command wants us across by." His voice broke off. His eyes had gone wide and wet, fixed on the middle distance, on ghosts. "Corporal Olivier Rondeau," he said hoarsely, and each name came out of him like a tooth being pulled. "Private Jesse Kirkwood, Master Corporal Denny Falardeau. I put them on that flank. There were 2 routes to the compound, and I picked the one along the irrigation ditch because it was faster. Because command was screaming about the timetable, and I gave the order myself over the net, my voice, my words, push up the ditch line, and 90 seconds later the whole world came apart. A tear slid into the deep crease beside his nose, and he didn't seem to feel it. So don't you stand there in your pajamas, in your safe little country that boys like Kirkwood died to keep boring, and tell me about hard days. Get out. Get someone else. Get me someone who knows what it costs." The room went very quiet, just the monitor beeping too fast, just the snow hissing at the window. Rachel did not call security. She did not go get Dr. Gruel. She stood there for a long moment, and then she did something no nurse had done in 5 days. She walked to the door and turned the lock. Drummond's head came around, some old instinct cutting through the fever. "What are you doing?" She crossed to the window and drew the blinds down, slat by slat, until the snow-gray light was gone, and the room sank into a soft dimness broken only by the glow of the monitor. Then she reached up, unclipped the ID badge from her scrubs, and set it face down on the bedside table like a card being taken out of the game. "You keep saying that," Rachel said. Her voice had changed. The clinical smoothness was gone out of it, and what was underneath was lower, rougher, and it did not belong to a hospital. It belonged to somewhere with generators and cot frames and dust. Someone who knows what it costs. You've said it 11 different ways since Sunday. She took hold of her left sleeve at the wrist. "You talked about the wheat," she said, rolling the fabric up, one fold another. "Higher than the LAVs. You talked about the ditch line and the grape rose and that river. You talked about Jesse Kirkwood. Another fold, past the elbow now. Private Jesse Kirkwood from Glace Bay, who carried hot sauce in his flak vest because he said the rations tasted like drywall, who lost a tooth in a ball hockey game at CAF 2 weeks before Medusa kicked off and wouldn't stop showing everybody the gap. Drummond's breath hitched. The glassiness in his eyes cracked like ice. How? His voice came out in pieces. How do you? Rachel stepped into the cone of light under the exam lamp and turned her forearm over. The tattoo was old ink, faded at the edges the way ink fades when it's been carried through years of sun and scrubbing. It was not delicate. At its center, a caduceus, the winged staff, crossed over a bayonet, and wrapped around both a single maple leaf, arched above in block letters, TF306, Pan-WII, and below, in numerals that landed on Wallace Drummond like a physical blow, like a round taking him center of mass. Charles Coy, 1 RCR, Obey Medusa. I was there, Colonel, Rachel said. Corporal Moreau, medical technician, attached to Charles' company out of Petawawa. Task Force 306. I rode in the back of your LAVs for 7 months. I ate the same dust. I filled out the same field message pads. And on the 2nd of September 2006, I was 300 meters behind your lead call sign when the ditch line went up. He stared at the ink. His jaw was trembling. His hand rose off the blanket a few centimeters, hovered, fell back as if he didn't trust himself to point. You want to talk about Jesse Kirkwood? Rachel's voice cracked then, for the first time in 9 years inside that building, and she let it. A tear tracked down and she didn't wipe it. Jess was mine. When the IED initiated and the machine guns opened up from the compound wall, I was the one who went up that ditch on my stomach through the fire. I was the one who got the tourniquets on. My hands. I did the 9-liner with my face in the mud while rounds were cutting the grass over my head. And when the medevac was 11 minutes out, and we both knew he didn't have 11 minutes, I held his hand and I told him about Cape Breton. I told him it was snowing there. I made it up. I have no idea if it was snowing. She leaned down until her face was level with the old soldier's, close enough to see her own reflection drowning in his eyes. I was the last thing Jesse Kirkwood ever saw, Colonel, so you will never, ever tell me again that I don't know what it costs. The silence that followed had weight. The monitor beeped into it, absurd, small. Wallace Drummond, who had made grown warrant officers go pale, who had thrown trays and torn out lines and driven half a hospital floor to tears, slowly raised one shaking hand and reached toward her forearm, not touching it, just hovering over the ink, the way you'd hold your palm above a candle flame or a relic. Doc, he whispered. The word came out of some sealed room inside him, the old name, the only name infantry ever really call their medics, and his whole face broke apart around it. My God, you're a doc. I was, Rachel said gently. She rolled the sleeve back down over the ink and the 2 puckered scars beneath it that he hadn't asked about yet. Now I'm your nurse, and here is your situation, Colonel. This infection is inside your bloodstream's front door. This line goes in within the hour, or you are going to die in this room, in this bed, in January, in Ottawa, 17 years too late for it to mean anything. And I did not crawl up that ditch in 2006 to lose another man from Charles' company in 2024. She held his gaze. So, do we understand each other? For a long moment he looked at her, and the fury was gone, all of it, burned off like fog, and what was left underneath was so raw and so tired that it was almost unbearable to see. He lay his head back against the pillow. His eyes closed. One tear slid down into the gray stubble at his jaw. "I," he said hoarsely. "Understood, Doc. Do it." She worked the way she had learned to work in another lifetime. Clean, quick, no wasted motion. Sterile gown, mask, the full drape until the room was a blue field with one island of scrubbed skin above his right elbow. The ultrasound found the basilic vein on the first pass. "Sharp poke, Colonel, then pressure. Don't move." He didn't. He lay like carved granite, knuckles pale on the rail, eyes on the ceiling tiles, and he did not make one sound as the needle went in, as the wire threaded, as she advanced the long catheter centimeter by centimeter up the vein while the monitor counted his heartbeats. 40 minutes later, the line was sutureless secured. The chest X-ray was called for, and the first bag of antibiotics, 9 hours overdue, finally opened its slow drip into his bloodstream. "Done," Rachel said, stripping her gloves. Her scrub top was damp between the shoulders. The adrenaline was ebbing, and behind it came the tiredness, the particular kind that wasn't about sleep. "Thank you, Doc." His voice was a ruin, 10 years older than it had been that morning. She pulled the rolling stool over and sat down beside the bed, elbows on her knees, and in the drawn blind dimness the room felt less like a hospital and more like a confessional. "You terrorized my floor, Colonel." "I know." He turned his head to look at her. The fever still burned in him, but the delirium had pulled back, leaving him beached and clear. "This morning I honestly thought, the smell in here, the antiseptic, the machines, it all runs together, and suddenly it's 41 degrees, and the air tastes like diesel, and I'm waiting for the net to come alive with a contact report." He exhaled shakily. "It's been 17 years, Doc. 17 years, and it's never further away than the next unguarded minute." "It doesn't leave," Rachel said quietly. "You just get stronger carrying it, most days." He was silent a moment. Then, staring at the ceiling, "You were behind us, on the second. Then you know what I did. I know what you think you did. Don't." The word came out sharp, then softened into pleading. "Don't do that. Don't handle me." "I've had 17 years of people handling me. I gave the order, Corporal. 2 routes to that compound. The tree line was slower, but it had cover. The irrigation ditch was fast, and I was getting hammered on the radio about the timeline. The whole brigade plan hanging on our push, and I chose fast. I chose fast, and Rondeau and Kirkwood and Falardeau paid for it. I've sat across from Olivier Rondeau's mother in Trois-Rivières at every regimental memorial for 17 years, and she holds my hand and thanks me, and every single time I want to tell her the truth, that her boy is dead because her boy's commander was in a hurry." His voice shook itself to pieces. "I sent them up that ditch, Doc. I have to carry that." Rachel looked down at her own hands for a long moment. Outside, a plow scraped along the street, its yellow light strobing faintly through the blinds. When she spoke, her voice had a care in it, a precision, like someone lifting something fragile out of a crate packed 17 years ago. "Colonel, I need you to listen to me now, and I need you to hear it as a soldier, not as a patient." "Can you do that?" His eyes came to hers. "You didn't send them into an ambush," Rachel said. "You sent them to exactly the right place, 90 seconds early. What are you talking about? What did the after-action report tell you?" "The one you saw. I'd strike on the ditch line, followed by small arms and machine gun fire from the compound. Complex ambush. 3 killed, 4 wounded. My route selection was reviewed, and his mouth twisted, no fault assigned, which we both know is Army, for nobody wanted to write it down. That report was gutted before it ever reached you," Rachel said. "There was an annex, classified, because what actually happened in that ditch involved an asset nobody was allowed to talk about. There was a special operations reconnaissance team dug in forward of our line that night, watching that compound, and everything they saw got sealed under their reporting chain. I only know because I treated their wounded signaler 2 days later, and because I gave testimony to the Board of Inquiry, and they classified my testimony too. I spent 17 years not allowed to say a word. The annex was finally released 3 years ago. Access to information. One of the regimental historians pried it loose. I've read it, Colonel. I have a copy in a filing box in my apartment in Vanier because some things you keep. She leaned forward. That compound wall your lead section was pushing toward. Do you know what was behind it? He had gone completely still. On the monitor, his heart rate climbed, but it wasn't fear. It was a man bracing. A recoilless rifle, Rachel said. An SPG-9, sandbagged in on a mud rooftop, with a full crew and a stack of rounds, laid directly on the only fording point on that stretch of the river. The crossing point, Colonel. The one the entire company was scheduled to push armor through 40 minutes later. Every lav we had was going to file past that gun at under 200 meters, broadside, one at a time, coming out of the water with nowhere to go. The Resi team had eyes on it and couldn't engage without burning their position, and their warning was still crawling up their own chain when your lead section entered the ditch. Drummond's lips parted. No sound came out. Rondeau saw it first, Rachel went on, and now her own eyes were burning because she had carried this sealed inside her for 17 years and the seal was breaking. The annex has the Rex team's log, minute by minute. Corporal Rondeau spotted the gun crew moving on the rooftop, and he didn't go firm and wait because there wasn't time. The crew was loading. He and Kirkwood and Fallardeau pushed straight up that ditch at the wall and engaged the position through a drainage gap in the mud brick. They forced that crew off the gun, Colonel. They were pulling the tripod down when the insurgents blew the command wire charge in the ditch as a last resort and opened up with everything they had left. That's what killed them. Not your route. Not your 90 seconds. They saw what was about to happen to this company, and 3 of them charged a fortified gun so that 40 of us would live to be old. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. You were in the 3rd vehicle in the crossing order, Colonel. I checked. 17 years ago, I checked. They didn't die because of your order. They died completing it, and saving your life and mine and every man in that column. The silence afterward was total. Even the snow seemed to have stopped to listen. And then Wallace Drummond, 31 years in uniform, a man who had delivered folded flags to mothers with his spine straight and his voice level, who had not wept at Kandahar airfield when the ramp ceremony pipes played, not at the repatriations on the Highway of Heroes with half of Ontario standing on the overpasses. Not once, not ever, because commanders do not get to, came apart. It was not quiet. It was not dignified. It was 17 years breaking loose at once, great heaving sobs that shook the bed rails, and Rachel Moreau did the only thing a doc has ever known how to do for one of her own. She stood up, and she put her arms around the old colonel's shaking shoulders. And she held on while the fever broke, and the ghosts of Panjwai, after 17 long winters, were finally allowed to stand down. The change in room 412 over the next 2 weeks became a kind of legend on the 4th floor. The antibiotics, running clean and uninterrupted through the line Rachel had placed, drove the infection back day by measurable day. The fever was gone within 48 hours. The blood counts fell. The orthopedic team began to talk about the debridement surgery with actual optimism. But it was the other transformation that the staff couldn't stop whispering about. Because the tyrant of the fourth floor had vanished, and in the bed where he'd been sat, a straight-backed, courtly old soldier who said, "Please and thank you," who apologized to Sophie Lanthier so gravely and so completely that she came out of the room crying for an entirely different reason, and who followed his care plan with a rigor that bordered on parade discipline. His loyalty, though, his absolute, unswerving allegiance, belonged to one person. "You can stand easy, Dr. Gruel," Drummond announced one morning as the internist came through the door trailing residents like ducklings. Nurse Moreau was in at 0700. "Lines flushed, bloods are drawn, my white count is 8.2, and I'm cleared for the stairs with the physio after lunch. She runs a tighter ward round than you do, doctor, and I mean that with respect to exactly one of you." Gruel looked at the chart, then over at Rachel, who stood by the window with the ghost of a smirk she wasn't fully suppressing. "It seems Nurse Moreau is running my floor now. She ran a casualty collection point under mortar fire," Dr. Drummond said, and though his voice had its old parade square edge, his eyes were shining. "She'll manage your clipboard. See that this hospital knows what it has." Discharge day came on a Friday in mid-February, one of those rare blue Ottawa mornings when the snow turns to crushed diamonds and the cold makes the air ring. Rachel was finishing her morning rounds when the charge nurse found her, wearing an expression Rachel couldn't read. "You're wanted down in the main lobby," the charge nurse said, and then, oddly, softly, "Take your time coming back up." The lobby of the Birchmount Veterans Health Center was 2 stories of glass and pale stone, with the Book of Remembrance in its case by the doors and a wall of regimental crests catching the morning sun. Rachel came around the information desk and stopped as though she'd walked into glass. Wallace Drummond was waiting for her in the center of the floor. He was out of the wheelchair, standing on his own, dressed in pressed gray trousers, a navy blazer with a small gleam of miniature medals on the breast, and a regimental beret set with the precision of a man who had been squaring berets since before she was born. But he was not alone. Behind him, in a silent, uneven semicircle, stood 7 men. They wore parkas and work boots and one leather vest with patches. 2 leaned on canes. One stood on a prosthetic with the particular rooted stillness of a man who has long since made peace with it. Every one of them was graying or gray, and every one of them was wearing, pinned over his heart, the 8-pointed star of the Royal Canadian Regiment. Rachel's breath left her. She knew them. Under the years and the winter coats, she knew every face. There was Sergeant, Warrant Officer, by the end, Gilles Aubertin, who used to sing terrible Quebecois country songs over the intercom until the crew commander threatened to leave him in Massam Gar. There was a man she had last seen on a stretcher on the flight line at Kandahar Airfield, with her handwriting in black marker on his forehead, blinking up at her through the dust as the Chinook's rotors spooled. And here he was, 60 years old, upright, alive, with tears already running freely into his collar. Charles Company. What was left of it? What had grown old of it? Standing on the stone floor of an Ottawa hospital lobby on a Friday morning. Around the edges of the lobby, the world had gone still. Porters stopped pushing. A physician stood frozen with her coffee halfway raised. Somebody at the information desk quietly turned off the hold music. Drummond walked forward, slowly, deliberately, refusing the cane Aubertin offered, until he stood 2 meters in front of her, and when he spoke, his commander's voice filled the whole glass room without effort. "Doc," he said, "for 17 years, this company believed we left our guardian angel behind in the Panjwai. We told stories about you at every reunion. The medic who went up the ditch. Most of us never even knew your name. We didn't know that the whole time you were right here, still on shift, still holding the line, still bringing our people home." He reached into his blazer and drew out a small box of scuffed honey-colored wood, the kind of box a soldier makes in a garage on the long nights when sleep won't come. He held it out in both hands. Rachel took it. Her hands would not stay steady. She worked the little brass hook and lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of folded green wool that she recognized, combat shirt wool, old pattern, lay a pair of Canadian Forces identity discs on a ball chain, scratched and clouded, one disc still faintly rimmed with the red of its silencer. The stamped letters had been worn soft by a decade and a half of a mother's thumb, but they were legible. They would be legible forever. Kirkwood J.J. His mum gave them to me 9 years ago at the memorial in Glace Bay, Drummond said, and now the parade square voice was gone, and it was just a father's voice, an old man's voice, breaking apart in a sunlit lobby. "She told me," she said, "Colonel, you hold on to these until you find the person who needs them more than you do." I thought she meant until I forgave myself. I couldn't. Not for 17 years, I couldn't, because I didn't know the truth. You gave me the truth, Doc. You were the last one to hold my soldier, and this month you brought him home to me. These belong to you now. She'd say so too. I phoned her Tuesday. We talked for 2 hours. His jaw trembled. It was snowing in Cape Breton, by the way. That day, she looked it up years ago. It was snowing. Rachel pressed the discs to her chest, and the sound she made was not a word. "Company," Auberton's voice cracked out across the lobby like a rifle shot, and 7 old soldiers straightened as one, heels finding each other, spines remembering. Drummond drew himself up beside them, past the pain in his hip, past the surgery scheduled for March, up to the full, unyielding height of the officer commanding Charles' company. "To your fallen comrade and your doc, general salute, salute." 8 right hands rose together, palms out, the long, slow Canadian salute, held and held and held, and it was backwards. Every one of those men knew it was backwards, a retired lieutenant colonel and his infantry saluting a corporal, and every one of them knew that some things stand above the protocol they break. They were not saluting a rank, they were saluting a 19-year-old from Glace Bay, who charged a gun so his brothers could grow old, and the woman who crawled through fire to hold his hand while it snowed at home, and everything unpayable that passes between soldiers in the places nobody else will ever see. Rachel Moreau stood in the winter light with Jesse Kirkwood's name against her heart, tears falling freely and her chin high, and she raised her right hand and returned the salute, slow, precise, the way she'd been taught at Borden a lifetime ago, for herself and for Rondeau and Falardeau and Kirkwood, and for every quiet hero who hangs the uniform up but never really takes it off. They still walk among us. They pour our coffee and shovel our driveways and check our blood pressure at 3 a.m, carrying their deepest scars under scrubs and parkas and work shirts, asking for nothing. If this story of sacrifice, healing, and the unbreakable bonds of those who serve touched your heart, take a moment to honor a veteran in your life. And drop a like, share this video, and subscribe for more true-to-life stories of the quiet heroes next door.